Jared, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
I mean, the title seems to be evidence for and against climate change. I suspect, although I don't know for sure, I suspect that most people who will show up will be believe at least that it is that climate change is real. So who is going to argue against? I mean, so you have a one-sided argument, do you not? I mean, not that I'm against climate change, but it just seemed like, I mean,
We have people from all political backgrounds that join Free Thinker Institute sessions. So I expect we will have people that don't believe in climate change showing up. And
okay.
I'm going to play devil's advocate, whether they show up or not, and try to shoot holes in the argument.
Okay.
I suspect we'll get a well-rounded perspective, but we'll see. Phil, I'm not sure for sure.
So I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I sometimes find that this is like a theological kind of debate where there's a lot of language confusion, because I think that might be part of the challenge, is that if you when somebody says, I doubt you'll find very many people that are arguing against climate change, I think often what people mean is, I don't think you'll find a lot of people who argue that there's not carbon emissions and that there's not global temperature change that is human induced and or human accelerated or et cetera as part of the life cycle. And then there's the effects side. And I think that's just, I'm speaking just me. I think that's where a lot of the sort of gray is. And I think what often happens is all that just gets merged together and it turns into a little bit of religion, which is either you have to buy it all or you can buy none of it. And I think that's where there's a lot of friction, or that's what I've seen when it comes to, so I don't know if that's something you're going to address at all. It's just the let's say loose use of non-scientific terminology for things that have a lot of science and sort of engineering behind them. So I don't know, did I lose you, or you guys want to cancel me, or or what in between? I don't know. So.
No, I think you're right. And if I don't get into some of the nuances you're talking about, feel free to steer us in that direction if you feel like it'll be more productive. I guess we'll wait a couple more minutes, and then I think we have a good group, so I'll wait like 2 or 3 more minutes. But yeah, I think let's talk about what we want to address. I have a particular I guess I agree with you in that I think nobody really says that climate change isn't happening, right? Or I don't know of anyone that says that. The big debate, I do hear a lot of people say climate change is happening, but it's part of Earth's natural fluctuations. And so I'm going to address the argument from that perspective and why people say that, and pull out the graphs and data of historical temperatures on Earth to sort of address that argument. But there are probably other aspects of climate change of is it a dire concern, yes or no? People can probably debate that as well. And if we come to a conclusion on some of these things that's good enough to move on to the next one, then we'll move on to the next one. And yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. I think the thing that would be interesting is attempting to sort of structure not just cause and effect, but consequences and sort of cost benefits, because I just find that there's not a lot of room for those conversations, because there's a lot of choices around resources and cost benefits that in the end sort of almost get very, they kind of get very reduced and once again, it turns into almost religion where it's either for or against. If it's for, it's just for anything on that one side, or against, it's for against anything on one side. And, I don't know if that actually means anything after a while.
Well, I think what you're referring to is kind of blind followership, which is the exactly what I started this organization to combat, which is blind followership. I really want to, and I want to have a community where we talk politely about things that historically people argue about, and so that we can talk politely and logically and help unearth the truth when people often are making emotional decisions and emotional reactions. And so with that, I'll kind of kick things off a little bit, because I think that's a good sort of segue into the whole purpose of the Free Thinker Institute. And let me go back on video. I'm gonna have to go off again to eat a little bit more food because I haven't eaten much for a long time. The part of the reason I started the Free Thinker Institute is to create a community where we could have open dialogue about even politically divisive issues, and have polite dialogue so that we can share ideas in a way that spreads truth. And that's why we have what we call the 5 intentions of the Free Thinker Institute. The first of which is to be the best version of ourselves and seek truth, which most people would argue they do want to seek truth. And the second is to have an open mind towards new ideas, be transparent about what we believe. And so that's what I hope we can do tonight is, all transparently share our beliefs and and listen to all the other ideas with an open mind. And then third is to use our critical thinking skills and to hone our critical thinking skills. Tonight, the event is called a workshop because we're all going to be kind of collaboratively seeking truth together. I'm going to present some stuff in the beginning, and normally we try to keep, to a small percentage of the time being a presentation and most of it being conversation. Tonight, it's going to be an actual workshop where we're all going to be able to do Google research and look for, facts for and against sort of propositions that we lay out there, or hypotheses that we have. And the ideas will hopefully improve our critical thinking skills by, getting outside of the box that we might currently be in, and challenge some, learn new things about a topic that is something that we're not typically learning new things about from, when I read articles about climate change, I'm not normally learning new things about the subject. But when I approached tonight's session and started doing research along the lines that I'll present, I did learn a lot of new things. And so I found it fascinating. And I think learning is key to all of this. And what I hope we all take out of this is that we've learned something new and interesting tonight about climate change, no matter what we agree with and no matter whether we change our mind or not. Phil, go ahead.
Yeah, this is part of what leads back to my original question. When you say that people who are interested in truth and free thinking and learning something, you're already segmenting those people who are willing to do that, which tends to be people who do want to learn. But there's that large segment of people who doesn't want to learn. They just want to, in a sense, use a way to serve their political purposes or whatever self-interest they are. That's what I mean. How can you expect this to be an open session when those people, I'm not saying they're being excluded, they will be self-excluded because they're just not interested in talking about this in any open way whatsoever. So it comes down to a political process as well.
You're on mute, Garrett.
Thank you. So why do we have people in the chat say whether or not, and I'm going to start with a very specific question, which is, whether or not we think climate change is human induced, or whether or not it's part of the natural fluctuations of the earth, from that is just part of the natural fluctuations of Earth since Earth's beginnings, which there have been natural climate change fluctuations. And so that to me is the key question is the climate change that we're encountering part of natural fluctuations, or is it human induced? And so let me
Well,
put in the
what
chat.
if you believe it's both? I mean, then
So
where
if
do
you
you
believe it's
go?
both, then it is partly human induced. So I would put that in the
No,
human induced
absolutely.
territory. And so
Okay.
let's put in the chat, like where people's head is at right now. Do you believe that Earth's like the natural climate change fluctuation, or the fluctuations that are going on right now, are part of Earth's natural fluctuations only, or are they, human induced in a way that is, statistically significant, and different from the historical?
Just to clarify, are you referring to, like, let's say the past 3 decades?
No, I'm saying, like, since the beginning of Earth's history, like since Earth was formed.
Yeah.
Sorry, no, but when you say whether or not it's human induced,
Oh,
are you
human
referring
induced at
like,
all, like since the beginning of Homo sapiens, theoretically, although I'm gonna hone in on the last, at post-industrial revolution, basically.
Okay. So
The last
is this
100
survey
years?
taken simply by us discussing it, or do you actually have a survey and then we begin with say, oh, this is the general consensus. We'll talk about it from
Go ahead
there.
and Google a survey, Phil. This is a workshop, so we're all gonna do research. So go ahead and Google the percentage of people that think that climate change is human induced. So there's one that says all natural, there's one that says marginal human induced. So there are multiple people representing, and we have 2 people that say human induced. So far we're at 2 and 2. We have a 50-50 split on whether or not climate change is human induced or not, more or less, doing a little rounding error. So I do think we have a diversity of opinions. Those are the 4 people that were, thank you all for sharing your opinions with transparency. That's what we want, is to have peaceful, polite conversation, not make anyone feel targeted for having any belief, but for everybody to be able to share their beliefs, and more importantly than their beliefs, which we all hear about different people's beliefs on a regular basis. What we want to get to is the why do I believe this? And to help people understand and explain why do they believe a certain thing. And so I'm going to do a little bit of back and forth in the beginning, presenting a few positions. And if I've missed anything, and so there's another one that says that the notion of climate change is meaningless. So that's clearly not in the, like, climate change is man directed or man influenced and important.
How do I send this? I don't know how to do it.
So you click on the little chat button, and then on the bottom of the screen, and then you can put a link in.
Oh, I put in the share button. Okay, I guess wrong. Well, how does it? Oh, that is chat. Okay, I guess that is chat, but how do I activate it so you can see it?
Under
I-
chat, like if you click chat, there's a little cursor that appears, and you'll paste your link in there, and then you can put it in. Robert, if you wanted to say something, you're welcome to. And I do want to kind of get started in the to kick off the topic, but go ahead. We can have a little pre-talk.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up the idea of, I guess my question is why we believe certain things. So not
Right.
just about our own bias, which could lead us to believe certain things, but just in general, like, why do we see certain facts or certain arguments as more convincing?
Right.
I think that's important too, to not just rely on the science, but understand how that science turns into belief, I guess, or into political movements, right?
Right. And that's exactly what we want to get at tonight, is why do people believe what they believe? Why do they believe that's a convincing reason to believe what they believe? And I would encourage everybody, again, to listen with an open mind and ask, questions, rather than just say, you're wrong and this is why you're wrong. Ask questions about why they believe that before challenging them or disagreeing with them. So that we can keep things as respectful as possible. I think Socratic dialogue is great. We want to ask questions to understand why people believe what they believe. And if we can, lead those, ask questions that lead to a contradiction, then great, maybe we've learned that that chain of beliefs may not be as accurate as we originally thought. Remco, go ahead, and then
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Garrett. Look, you've had three people. Garrett. You've had three people, Aaron, Phil, and Robert, say the same thing. That it's more about why those beliefs are held. Look, I spent the last 6-9 months exploring conspiracy theories. And whilst you might say this is not about conspiracy theories, for many people it is in a way. Why not just drop the debating part of it rather than dealing with opinions and viewpoints and evidence? And we can all pull up evidence one way or the other. Why don't we just go straight for the jugular and find out why these beliefs are held? I mean, you've had three people say it to you, and I'm going to raise my hand and say the same. I'm very interested in climate change. I think it's threatening civilization, and I could certainly pull out lots of charts. But is that really going to advance anything? I think it's far more valuable to find out why those beliefs are held, because to me it has a large part to do with tribalism. It's part of being in an in-group, and what is that in-group, and what does it represent, and why do we choose to align ourselves with that?
Nigga, I don't give a fuck what the fuck you watching. If you want me to watch something, nigga, suck a million dicks. We don't give a fuck.
Oh well.
So
Anyway.
I did limit.
Clearly, we have to include the BLM component when we're talking about global warming.
So Remco, I am going to go for the jugular in this argument, but it's a different jugular than the one you're talking about, which is you're talking about a politically loaded jugular in and of itself, and I'm not going to go for the politically loaded one. I do want to get into why people believe what they believe about climate change, but I do want to get into facts and charts, because for me, that's where the truth can be found, is through facts and charts and data. And I would argue that this is a more nuanced subject than a lot of the people that have been speaking so far want to admit. And I'm going to try to make the case for that. With that said, Phil, I just want to get into presenting kind of the basic, starting of the conversation because we've been kind of going on, back and forth about whether or not this is a topic worth discussing, basically. And, I'd like to actually discuss the topic at hand, because that's what people came for. And so let me start off. I'm going to share my screen. Basically, what I learned in doing some research is that basically the general argument that I've heard from from people who don't agree that climate change is is human induced, is that we're within the natural fluctuations of Earth's temperature changes since the beginning of Earth's creation. And so what I did is I Googled some information about Earth's temperatures since the beginning of history. And actually that turns out to be an accurate claim. If you look at Earth's temperature, it's gone from very hot and really much hotter than it is right now in many times in its history. And the times below, I believe, is with polar ice caps. And there have been large amounts of time that the Earth didn't even have polar caps. And I found that interesting. I didn't know that until I started fact checking this and researched it. And so I said, oh, that's an interesting observation. So I posted that to the online community in our Discord server for the Freethinker Institute. And let me before I get to the posting it, I'm going to also talk about there are temperature fluctuations in the last 800,000 years. And so as you saw before, we are within the fluctuations since Earth's beginning, but within the last 800,000 years, if you look at the fluctuations, we are at the high end. This is CO2, and this is Antarctica. This is global average. The blue is the temperatures. where like, and I think that there's a blue line in here showing that it's a little hard to read, but I'm pretty sure we are at the high end of the last 800,000 years. But then, and that's that same chart. The key difference, and when I posted this to the online community, is that someone pointed out that the rate of change of the temperature is much faster in the current, in the last 100 years since the Industrial Revolution than it has ever been. And I tried to get pretty scientific about that. And so what I did is I basically zoomed in on the chart of Earth's temperature, Earth's history, and looked at the different points at which the different fluctuations. And let me see if I can get this on the screen at the same time. Basically, what I did is I looked at different fluctuations. And so I looked at like right here and right here and right here. And then this is probably the steepest climb of all the fluctuations. And so I looked at all of the major increases, or a lot of the major increases, the steepest ones anyway, that I could find. And I calculated how large of a temperature increase happened, which is here, over what time period, which is here. And then what I calculated is how many years did it take for Earth's temperature to increase by 1 degree Fahrenheit? And what I found is actually a little bit petrifying, which is that, the steepest curve that I could find in Earth's history was 168,000 years to go up 1 degree Fahrenheit. Whereas in the last 200 years, we've gone up about 1 degree Fahrenheit in each of the last 200 years. And so that was pretty interesting to me, and said, maybe something is going on here. Now, I did fact check further and look for, maybe this is just such a small time period that that it's not a good measure. And I found an interesting article that sort of agreed with that from this source. And by the way, I tried to look up carbon dioxide. I don't know if anyone wants to fact check carbon dioxide levels since the beginning of Earth's history. I wasn't able to find it. But let me let a bunch of people have hands up so we can go ahead. I do want to finish the back and forth here, because there's a lot of back and forth of like, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense. But let me let Phil go. Go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, I think your argument is really good. I mean, I think the thing to understand is that we can never be absolutely certain about anything, but the evidence that's produced is convincing, in the sense that not only the steep curve that is happening, but also its coincidence with the Industrial Revolution and a world population explosion. I mean, it at least hints at the fact that human beings at least have something to do with it. I mean, I actually think that maybe is more complex than that, but nonetheless, I think human beings is contributing to a degree. The question is to what degree? Okay, so we have to be careful about that in our evaluation.
Yeah, and if you guys don't mind, for those of you with your hands up, just give me a couple of more minutes. I want to finish this kind of train of thought of this research that I did. Basically, I said, let me look at whether or not there have been historical time periods during which the temperature rose this quickly. And I found this article, who interestingly had the title, "Researchers Show That Global Warming Happened Just as Fast in the Past as Today." I reread this article 3 times, and I was completely confused because the content of the article actually seemed to disagree with the title of the article, and they made the claim multiple times, but the one piece of quantitative data they gave was that actually it's 42 times faster right now that the temperature is increasing as compared to the Permian Triassic boundary, which was 42 times slower than the current pace. And yet they were also saying that we can't get as specific in the past. And so they were making the claim that because we can't be as specific in the past, that it's not any different, but they also compared it as best as they could to the past. And right now it's 42 times faster that we're increasing the temperature of the world. And so I found that kind of interesting. And so I fact checked the political bias of phys.org, and it turns out to be fairly centrist leaning according to all media fact check. And so they seem to be like a supposedly objective source, but it doesn't feel very objective when I read an article and it says that, you know, current temperatures are rising 42 times faster than historical, but oh, by the way, it's risen just as fast in the history as it is now. And I couldn't make sense of this article as a result of that. I'm going to post the article and maybe someone else can make better sense of it than I could. But I'm going to post the article in the chat for anyone that wants to take a look. And with that, I'm going to go to the hands, because that's really the last thing that I wanted to present, is this back and forth of like, it seems to me like it's not. Oh, and there is one other thing that I want to present is I'm going to post another article, which is a scientific study that says that a temperature increase of 5.2 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial level at the present rate of increase would likely result in a mass extinction event. And they were basically saying that we are in a mass extinction event in this article. And I didn't get to fully read the study, but I found that all I could tell is that this seems like a much more nuanced subject than even that I'm presenting earlier, but maybe we can hone in on the subject of temperature fluctuations and see if we can come to a meaningful conclusion there. And if we can, then we can move on to the next thing. And with that said, Ryan, you were the next person that had your hand up.
Okay, I was going to ask if you
Sorry,
would please.
Ryan Baggett, but
Yep.
if was that you talking?
Mhm.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I didn't see that you were speaking. So
Okay, I was going to ask if you'd planned to post all those links. I see the one here from phys.org, the last one, but there's several other links you'd posted before.
yeah, I will. I'll post the whole Google Doc that I just.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you for asking. I will post that. And actually, here we go. Anyone with the link. That's what I want. So I'll post that now.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yep. So
Thanks. Anything else for you, Ryan, or should we go to Aaron?
please go to Aaron.
Okay, go ahead, Aaron.
I'll drop my hand here.
Yeah, no, thanks. So I guess one little quick point of clarification I was looking at is, and then also just sort of a broader point is that when we have a scale that's hundreds of millions of years, but it's only maybe 50 data points, it winds up masking an enormous amount of sensitivity that goes on within each one of those million units. And then when we have graphs that are showing all the fluctuation within 800,000 years, which might be another 40 units, which are, you know, roughly 20,000 year fluctuations, that shows another one. And then, and I'm not saying you, but I'm saying what I've constantly seen, and I work sort of in industrial systems and, you know, sort of Lean Six Sigma data stuff, all that kind of stuff for my career. And then when we have one that is in, you know, 350 years and it shows all this variation, and then we sort of smash it all together and say, see, X is Y. So I've always found that that's like, you wouldn't do a study that way for like something you're trying to prove in school, much less something you're trying to have like a global policy change for. So that's just sort of a side point. The piece that I always kind of constantly come back to is there's a carbon cycle, and there's carbon sinks and there's carbon production that's natural, and then we have the amplification. I put in the chat a link from the Statistica, which shows pretty clearly since, especially the last 75, 80 years. It's sort of an explosion as the world's sort of developing and populations are developing, or staying alive, basically. That you've had obviously a substantial increase in the amount of carbon emissions within the last several hundred years, but there still is that carbon sink process. And obviously, if there's more carbon in the atmosphere and it can't get processed and it generates heat, then obviously some of that carbon sink gets weakened. And so that's where you can, where the principle is, that's where you can have a feedback loop. I think we don't necessarily talk about that like at the isolated sort of scientific level to try to get an understanding of the, let's say, the sensitivity and the tolerance that's going on within those pieces. And I think that's important because when people use language like extinction, immediate 7 years, everything has to go to X, EV or whatever, there's sort of a graphing of solution onto something that there is a lot of sort of analysis for. Does that make any sense? Or no?
It's a game you win by not playing.
I understand, but they should be paid. They should be
Makes
punished
sense to
for it.
me.
They have to sign up and
Okay.
they're-
So I can hear somebody else talking, I guess. So
Sorry, I had
Yeah.
to find who it was I needed to mute, and I got it wrong the first
Okay.
time. So, the part that I think I understood was that we have finer detail now in temperature fluctuation than we did historically hundreds of millions of years ago. And that's definitely true. And I agree that it's not an ideal way of studying it, but I also think it's the best data we have available at our grasp, because hundreds of millions of years ago, we can't date that accurately to Earth's temperature fluctuations. And so what we're doing is making the best comparison that we can given the data we have today. And unfortunately, that's imperfect. But I agree that it is imperfect, and we do need to recognize that. And I think one of the things that science often doesn't do enough of is acknowledging its own limitations. And I think that's one that's a fair limitation to acknowledge about this kind of comparison. Was there another key part that I missed there? I feel like there was.
yeah, I mean, the only other one I would say is that we get extremely focused on temperature, which makes sense because we're a metabolic species that responds to it. But you can have temperature variation, but to me, what's always in some ways matters more is what's the carbon relationship, parts per million, carbon sinks, what's that processing like? And then ultimately, in some ways, temperature can be symptomatic, maybe. I mean, I think it probably is, but I don't know if it's 100% symptomatic. I guess that would be the way I would put it. I'm sure it has influence that's substantial, but I don't know if it's something like 100%.
Thanks for mentioning carbon, because I forgot that I also did a little research on the carbon dioxide concentrations. And what I found is that between 200 and 150 million years ago, and this is in the Google Doc, there were carbon dioxide levels of over 3,000 parts per million. For contrast, we're currently at about 400 parts per million, which is the highest we've been in the last, I think, 800,000 years. But between 6 and 400 million years ago, it was about 6,000 parts per million. Now, mind you, that was a very different time on Earth, but I found those data points interesting to say that we're also not at an unprecedentedly high carbon dioxide level in Earth's history either. And that's why I was asking if anyone is able to like Google and find a graph of carbon dioxide levels on Earth over time, and carbon dioxide increases over time. We could do a similar comparison to the temperature one I did. But that said, like, again, I'm just presenting, what I found when I looked at the data. And with that said, I want to go to Robert.
So yeah, I don't know, the data you presented, I found the second set of graphs to be pretty convincing over the past 800,000 years. because there seemed to be a clear pattern there. So yeah, I would kind of expect us to be following that pattern. The thing though with the other graph, the 500 million years, I didn't really see a pattern there. So I guess for me, like, I want to better understand why that graph could be convincing to people to say that we're not outside the bounds of temperature that could happen on Earth, right? So I'm just wondering, like, I don't know, if there's no pattern, what are we really getting from that data, or why is that data convincing to us? I don't know, that's just a question I wanted to throw out there. Yeah, I don't need an immediate answer.
I mean, I did see I mean, not as clear of a like cyclical pattern in the 500 million year history, but there was a pretty clear pattern of ups and downs, right? And there were a lot of ups and downs in the last 500 million years. There were bigger fluctuations of ups and downs, but that sort of makes sense over a bigger time horizon. So I guess I didn't see like a, like a total, lack of any pattern whatsoever in the 500 million years. Did you feel like, because it's going up and down, right? Let me show the graph again, just to put it on the screen. It's going up and down, pretty, not with the same level of cyclical nature as the last 800,000, which, I can show again as well. But there is,
Yeah, so I guess, like, in that sense, temperature over millions of years goes up and down quite drastically.
yeah. And in the last 800,000, it goes up and down significantly.
But like, it's in the last 800,000 years, there's arguably like about a 5-degree difference, maybe 10 degrees. And over the past billions of years, it's quite more significant. But yeah, I'm just, like I said, there's a cyclical pattern. I guess I'm just trying to understand, like, is the value of the 500 million years the fact that temperature can go up and down pretty significantly? So I think that graph does prove that.
The argument that I've heard was that we are still within the boundaries of Earth's natural fluctuations of temperature rising and falling. And while at first glance that seems to be true, because we are actually at the very low end, we're at the cooler side, one of the coolest 20% of Earth's fluctuations of temperature, the rate at which it's going up, based on the long time periods over which it increased very quickly, like even looking at the highest increases, it's increasing at a rate far faster than that. Now, maybe the answer is it's just that we're looking at a shorter term time period, which I think it was Ryan was saying, or Aaron was saying, that maybe it's just that we're looking at such a small time period that, that's like a measurement problem, that those really fast rises historically were rounded out because we couldn't get so precise in the historical measurements. That's possible. I personally, after looking at the data of like how drastic of a change it was, just to remind everybody, the fastest change in history was 168,000 years to rise 1 degree of Fahrenheit. And we've seen that in the last 200 years happening in only 100 years of time. That means it's 1,600 times faster than the fastest time that we found in history. That's a
quick question, Garrett.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, and this isn't I'm not debating you on this.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense for one simple reason, is that the volcanic, I mean, the two most powerful things that's ever happened to this planet are basically colliding with what a space body, which became the moon, and then basically the Deccan Flats construction of all of the mountain ranges basically in Eastern Eurasia, and where you had estimates on somewhere in the order of like 1 million years of, these are volcanic index 7, 8, probably even 9s that we don't even have a way to calculate the amount of sulfur that was released. So clearly there were periods of time in history that you had more than a degree. That I'm not arguing that that's not that's a negation either, right? So I'm not suggesting that doesn't mean that there can't be, or that there isn't a human inducement or a sort of an amplification. I'm just pointing out that I think when we say things like 1 degree changes, there's been an enormous amount of periods when we've had a 1 degree change because of basically volcanism. I mean, volcanism is fundamental on this planet. I mean, that's just, I mean, you could get rid of all the humans literally, and then wait 50,000 years, everything would damp down. If you had a VE8 event, it would just blow everything off the rack for probably hundreds of years. So I mean, it's just, there is reality with volcanism that I think is important to kind of consider.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that I guess the time periods that I looked at, there was a rise of 39 degrees Fahrenheit in just one rise, but it happened over 20 to 21 million years. And so it just happened much slower. But if you can find, and I would love for you to Google and look for a time period in history where there was a rise as fast as we're perceiving right now, Aaron, just try Googling a little and look for some sources for historical time periods, because when I looked for the fastest historical time periods known to man since Earth's beginning, I found that article that said it was 42 times slower than the current rise. And so that was the best that I was able to do to agree with your statement. I was looking for something that agreed with your statement.
Yeah, but this goes for like temperature, which is such a weird thing relative to parts per million of carbon. It's like it's like really is like apples and like vases. I mean, it's just two very different measurement parts of the measurement spectrum.
Well, you were referring to the carbon dioxide comments.
Well, yeah. So I mean, I'll just give you a concrete example. So if you had we know that that there are super volcanoes on the planet. There's one at Yosemite.
Yep.
They go off every X 100,000 years to X million years. The planet generates one of them. Clearly those events, I mean, it would cover most of North America with inches to feet of ash. Clearly those events transform the ecology of the whole planet for hundreds to probably thousands of years, and are extremely disruptive in carbon emissions on the planet, and of obviously temperature and heat cycles and cooling cycles, until there's sort of a new cycle that begins from that. And so I'm not arguing that. Well, I guess what I'm really arguing is that we've probably, maybe this is the best analogy, maybe that's what we've generated. Maybe we have a very slow semi-volcano the last 250 years. Maybe that's what we really are, which doesn't mean that we're not doing this. It just means that maybe that's the modeling that you'd want to do to figure out, okay, how much are we like a VE8 in the last 100 years or 200 years? Does that make sense or not?
I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I guess that's what we did by looking at the historical, time temperature fluctuations since the beginning of Earth's history. Is we looked at all of those tectonic, volcanic events and like what their impacts were on Earth's temperature, and we measured them and we compared them to the modern day and tried to make the best, again, an imperfect, you're right, an imperfect.
But 168,000 years for a 1 degree increase and 4 billion years just doesn't add up. I mean, we've had a greater fluctuation than 1 degree in any 168,000 year period.
So
Or else what we're
maybe-
saying is that you
maybe I
can
didn't-
blow off half of Montana and the Earth's temperature won't go up by more than a degree in a year, which doesn't make sense, obviously, given the
so we
volume
can't-
of.
we can't measure the historical fluctuations to a 1 year degree of certitude, right? So-
Exactly. That's my
but what
point.
we can do is say that in historical levels, if the temperature of the earth had gone up, you know, like the fluctuations, how do I say this? The fluctuations that we could measure when we measure the rate of fluctuation were nowhere near what we're able to measure today. If that makes
Yeah,
sense.
and I
Because we
think,
don't have the ice cores. We don't have ice
think,
cores for
Eric,
200
you were
million years
saying
ago.
that if we are able to find information that contradicts what you're saying, you are fully open to that, right?
Of course.
I'm just wondering if
Yeah, feel
other
free.
people.
Yeah,
if
and
people
I would
to
love
join the
for people that-
conversation.
yeah, I want people to look for contradictory evidence. That's the whole goal here, is to like, and I think I, even in what I presented, went back and forth on, yes, this makes sense that it's climate change. No, it doesn't. And I don't think I came to a conclusion, right? Like, I don't have a conclusion myself. So if I came to a conclusion, it was you guys reading into it, because I don't have a conclusion myself for what the answer is. Like, I'm still looking for the answer, and that's what tonight's goal is to look for an answer together. And with that said, you know, I welcome all evidence to the pro and con of climate change as human induced. And with that said, I want to let Phil go and then Betsy next.
Yeah, I think, I guess I'm gonna be talking about what Aaron says, and to a certain degree what Robert said. But first, to set the stage, human beings live a very short life. And so we don't have understanding of a long time span. Even if you take human beings as, let's say, intelligent people that have a sense of history, that's maybe 2,000, okay, let's say 5,000, let's say even 10,000 years. And so we have to first admit that there are many things we do not understand fully. So I could understand that the short time frame is, in a sense, kind of valid in one sense, because we're operating within our understanding. And what I find curious, and I think it's important to stress this, is that these things that happened, let's say millions of years ago, hundreds of millions of years ago, we don't totally understand. And I'm very curious that within those time spans, there has been much greater temperatures than we have now. And all we could do, in a sense, is to use our intellect to construct a forensic science of sorts, to try to understand that. And forensic science, it's peculiar. I mean, it's just an inferential. But what I find interesting is, for instance, there was a time the Earth was snowball Earth, according to what we supposedly know. And the Siberian traps broke up the snowball and eventually, in a sense, warm up the world to a certain degree. Okay. So in some sense, but that's an inference. I believe in that inference, but that's an inference. And what I'm interested in is all those places that has these higher temperature differences, not the slope, but just the ultimate inferences. If we could match them to degrees, like the Siberian traps, you know, or the meteor crashing into the Earth 65 million years ago, then we could say, aha, there's at least some evidence to match those relationships that's beyond our direct understanding. And that would be an inference, but it would be helpful to construct those relationships. Also, what was mentioned is that the carbon, I shouldn't even say the carbon sink cycle. The sink cycle, the temperature sink cycle, we have been using coal, we have been using oil, which are sinks. And there seems to be some evidence that is putting carbon back in the atmosphere. But there are other sinks, such as methane, which are still locked primarily, not totally. And that's much, much more affect the climate change than that. And we apparently there are people who are very concerned about reaching a temperature where they will, in a sense, release, and that will be a catastrophe. I mean, what they say is true. That is a sink. So there are many things that indicates that is at least partially, well, let me put it a different way. We are afraid that it will come to a point that all these sinks will be released. And part of it might be caused by us. I won't say it definitely, but might be caused by us because the methane sink would not in some ways be directly caused by us, but it will be warming up the world enough that it become released, and we didn't release that and use that to that degree. So there are just these ambiguities, but there's enough evidence to show that perhaps we might be at least somewhat responsible for causing enough change that other unknown catastrophe could happen that we have not even accounted for beyond the carbon cycle. And, you know, and measuring the one other thing I want to put in, which is what you mentioned, is the extinction factor. Yes, that's true. Absolutely true. But the problem is that caused by heating up the world, or is that caused by the fact that we just have so many human beings? We have displaced the space for natural evolution to take place. So therefore, it's a different cause that might not have anything to do with the carbon cycle, but it's definitely caused by us, maybe. Because when you have less forests, when you have less things, then in a sense it's harder for these other beings to survive, such as the fisheries. I mean, the fishing boats are just extracting, and we know that directly is the case. So there are evidence that we are causing things around the world to change. Some of it probably, at least possibly, caused by us, but other things we know definitely is caused by us, such as like the depopulation of fish, and the fact that only 10%, somebody told me it's actually 5% now, or 4% of the living living mammals are still original, and the other 90 or 95% is domesticated animals. That's a definite change because before we came, none of them were domesticated. So in some sense, we actually have an effect on the world. Maybe you can't quite pinpoint it directly to actually human being is causing the global warming. I actually happen to believe that is partially true, at least, but we are definitely affecting the world in multiple dimensions.
Thanks, Phil. I would fact check that domesticated thing. Like, I don't think there are that many things domesticated, but that's just a guess that's a surprising metric.
Well, no, I think that's large mammals, I think is the category.
Oh, okay. It may
So
be
in the so we basically
right?
eliminated because we had to, like it's good morally, it's just we had to because that's our evolution. Basically all the other apex predators on Earth, like on land, basically, and in sea for the most part, close to it. And then we basically have domesticated large mammal species for food, basically.
I don't know. I still would be surprised, but that said, that's not the topic for tonight. So I won't delve deep into it. Betsy, why don't you go next?
Sure, thank you. So I do believe that climate change is caused at the rate that it's going, induced by human activity during the Industrial Revolution, that we started. The output of CO2 and methane into the atmosphere has increased dramatically, and it's caused by us. Now, the reason why I believe that is because in science, I am a scientist, but in oncology. So in science, we have a thing called, and they were asking why do people believe what they believe, right? That's what you were asking in the beginning. So
Yep.
in science, there's something that's called like Hill's criteria to determine causation. So in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, people believed that smoking did not cause cancer, or they didn't know. And we use Hill's criteria to determine that there was a causation between the smoking and the lung cancer, right? So Hill's criteria is essentially 10 things. There's a strength of association, there's a consistency, there's a specificity, there is time involved, temporality, and there's a biological gradient, and there is reversibility. So if you were exposed to the cigarette smoke, right, and over time, we can track this, how many years you smoke, how many packs, that's the dose that you got of the carcinogens. We were able to determine that the dose, right, of the cigarettes and the time determined how fast you got lung cancer. There was a direct relationship between the smoking and the lung cancer, and you were able to determine that by the amount of time. Forwards, if you look prospectively, and also if you look backwards in time, people that already had cancer, and then you look back at their history, and you were able to determine that they were also smokers, right? So that's what it's kind of akin to what's happening here with climate change, because we have the dose is the carbon that is being put in the atmosphere. And the cause is, or the effects that we're seeing is the increase, not only of temperatures, but also the increase, the polar caps melting, the increase of the, what is it called? Where the polar caps are melting, and then you have an increase, the ocean is rising up. I can't remember the word. But, and also, like you guys were mentioning about the sink, the CO2 sink in the ocean, and the acidification of the ocean is causing a lot of, the marine life to die. And if the ocean dies, because the ocean produces most of the oxygen that we inhale to survive, if the oxygen is gone and the ocean dies, we're gone. So those are like really critical things that are happening that are going to cause, our possible extinction. This is an existential crisis. And also the thing is that you have multiple scientists, so there is a scientific consensus around the world that you have tons of scientists that are getting the same results over and over again. And they see that there is an association between the carbon that is being put in the atmosphere, the increases in temperature, and an unprecedented rate, like you said, based on the data that you showed. So it's hard to seeing all that data and all the consensus of experiments around the world to be skeptical that it's not us that are causing this. And also, if you look at, like, I live in Houston, Texas, so this is kind of like a capital of fossil fuels. So if you look at the papers, core papers from the 1970s, ExxonMobil did a study where their own researchers show that climate change was happening because of fossil fuels, and they try to bury those court documents. And they are now saying like, that does not happen. The same way that people from the tobacco industry did studies and they knew that smoking caused cancer and they try to bury those things. So if those people that are, you know, responsible for producing all these fossil fuels find the same findings that other scientists are seeing around the world, and they're trying to bury them because it's not going to be convenient for them, because that's going to affect the bottom line, that also increases my confidence that what the scientists around the world are saying is true. So that's just my take on it.
Thanks, Betsy. And that gets to our conversation about truth and trust that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, where if someone tells you something that's not in their own best interest, they're a much more credible source. So having the people releasing carbon have their own researchers saying that climate change is real, it comes from a much more trustworthy source, because that's the last thing they'd want to do, as is evidence from them trying to hide the fact that their researchers came up with that. That said, Robert, why don't you go next?
Thanks. Yeah, thanks. I think you made a lot of really good points, Betsy. Thanks for that. I think, yeah, one way to look at it too is it's sort of an unprecedented occurrence, at least within recorded history, what's happening right now. So like, regardless of the reason behind it, it seems worthwhile to kind of take a cautious approach. I think what Phil was saying, if we can do something, we should try to do something. That's sort of my philosophical take on it. Yeah, just going back to the temperature data we were looking at earlier, I don't know, the way I kind of interpret the large scale data is that the Earth will survive this situation. If temperatures increase dramatically, the Earth will be fine, and it seems likely some form of life will survive. For me personally, I'm heavily biased towards humans, not just life in general. So I would very much like humanity survive, not just the next 1,000 years, but the next tens of thousands of years. And also, I would prefer that the quality of life would increase around the world rather than potentially decrease. So again, that's sort of just philosophical side of it. But yeah, with I was looking at mass extinction events. So this might be, and yeah, there is some correlation between some of the big mass extinction events and the rate of temperature changes. So like some of those peaks and some of those dips.
It's a big correlation, I think. But go ahead, I'm sorry. It's a big
correlation. So of course, it's so far in the past, it's hard to really pinpoint certain things, but at the same time, again, it seems worthwhile to be cautious around these things. Even if there's the idea that even if humans aren't causing it, we are still going to suffer the consequences, right? So maybe it's worthwhile to try to limit things. If we do reduce our carbon dioxide emissions, we might have a lot of drawbacks in the short term, but potentially lots of benefits long term. And at the same time, it seems worthwhile to diversify our approach. So one approach people have been taking is to try to protect humanity from climate change, because like with the assumption that it will happen anyways, versus the more, I'd say, political approach of trying to stop climate change from happening by reducing carbon emissions. So I don't know, like, yeah, I guess I'm saying don't put all your eggs in the same basket. But yeah, I think right now too, it's hard to compare what's happening now to other times in history, because it's either we don't have the same scale, or nothing like this has really happened for us to, at least not in human history, as far as I know, nothing like this has happened for us to kind of look back and be like, oh, everything worked out, right? It feels like it's worth being cautious and to assume things aren't going to work out, and what can we do to stop that?
We're gonna explore that in a little bit of game theory. I want to let Les go next, and then I'm gonna jump in to extend what you just said, Robert, with a little bit of game theory around, exploring what you were just delving into. And Betsy, you still have your hand up if you want to put it down, so that, and if you want to put it up again, you're welcome to, but I want to let Les go.
Thanks, Garrett.
Sure.
Yeah, getting back to the question about the current rate of increase in temperature and comparing that to what happened millions of years ago, and Warren made this point in the chat, that it's interesting, but it's not terribly relevant, because if there was a point in the past where the rate of increase in temperature increased faster in a 100-year period than what it is currently, it's not that pertinent, because the current rapid increase in temperature, if it is due to humans, it indicates what a narrow time frame we have to settle the change down, to reduce the rate of increase, to ensure our survival.
And
that's all I'll say.
I guess, yeah, I think what you're saying is that even if the historical changes did happen as fast, if the current change is human caused, and that's where I would caution you to say, I think the people that are saying it happened historically this fast are saying it's not human caused. And so the reason that I was making that point is to say, I think that if I look at historical temperatures, if they were going to have risen or dropped this quickly, I'm guessing it would have been part of a larger trend rather than a little blip like our 200-year blip. And so for me, like, I find it more convincing that it is human caused than that it's not human caused, because of the rate of change and the pace at which it's changing. But I would just say that, I hear what you're saying and I agree with you, but it's kind of assuming that the current rate of change is human caused. And I do agree with that, but I would be curious to hear from people that, before I go on to the game theory perspective, which is kind of where I'm blanking on his name, was just going, that spoke just a second ago. Robert was going before, is I want to kind of finish out the conversation of, like, do we think this change is human caused or not? And then after that, I want to get into the conversation of, game theory, which is, if we treat climate change as if it is human caused, what are the downsides? And if we ignore it when it turns out it was human caused, what are the downsides to that? And then that's really game theory, right? Choosing, what if we choose these two options? What are the risks? And I'd love to explore that as a group as well. But that said, if anyone has other reasons to believe that climate change is not, I'd really like to encourage, and I did this in the chat, but I want to encourage openly people who don't think that the rapid temperature increase is human caused. I would love to hear the explanation for why they feel like it's not human caused, given that it is such a rapid rate and one that seems to be unprecedented in Earth's history, given the caveats that we can't get as accurate down to the, like, 1 year by 1 year, time rate 500 million years ago. We didn't have that level of accuracy. We don't have that level of accuracy historically, but I'm curious, for anyone that thinks that climate change is not, or that this temperature increase that we're exhibiting or experiencing right now is not human caused, I'd love to hear why you're not convinced of that. If anyone's willing to speak up. And feel free to just talk. I'm gonna jump you ahead of line, because we've had a lot of people that seem to be saying that climate change is human caused. I really want to hear the perspective of people who think that it's not human caused.
I can jump in and say that although I didn't hear the whole discussion. I'll give you three reasons why it's not, why the debate moves that it's not human cause. You go to Home Depot and you buy a 5-gallon bucket of air, one of those orange buckets. To four significant figures, it's 80% nitrogen and 20% oxygen. And at the bottom of that bucket is half of a split pea, And there's very reliable calculations that the skin on that split pea, and when you eat split peas or you eat tomatoes, you peel them first, right? And the skin on that split pea is the human caused factor. Now, that says that carbon dioxide is a very, very minor piece of it. If you're driving along in a stiff wind and a tree falls on your car, that tree is mostly carbon that has been produced by carbon dioxide from the sun, and that tree that's carbon is reclaimed carbon, and that's the bulk of the mass of the tree. The nutrients it gets from the soil are a very small percentage of the mass of that tree. So we'll store that fact for a minute, and then I'll tell you another fact. When you were in grammar school, you solved a quadratic equation, and you saw that there were two answers in the quadratic equation. And if you were trying to pardon? If you were trying to maximize your funding, you would pick the answer that supported your case of particularly if Al Gore was in the loop to give you funding. Now, the Bernoulli equation is the thing that governs climate change. And how you solve the Bernoulli equation is a transcendental equation, which has hundreds of solutions. And you would pick the one if you were the East Anglia University that maximizes your funding, because they're the repository for the IPCC that is evaluating all this stuff. Now, you take somebody hacked into the IPCC and got the whole model and internal correspondence that says we've got to adjust the data because there's a whole amount of data that obeys the rules of entropy and other things that say we're in a position of global cooling. So by adjusting the data, they can prove, and totally rationally, that we have global warming, 0.2 of a degree per decade, which I'll add up over 100 years into something meaningful. But the net trend, if you use the raw data, which often is taken, when the Cold War was over, they changed the location of of a lot of the measuring sites that gave grossly different data, no continual data across it. And a lot of the data is near airports and cities, which are a little bit warmer, and even that didn't work. Now, when they hacked into this thing, there was East Anglia University. The model is really written terribly. It's in an old version of Fortran 2 at the time that they hacked into it about 5 years ago. And they put in fudge factors and adjustments, which are in the code that people have come up with. And now East Anglia University didn't said those were working papers. That isn't what, and the things signed by directors and people all over the world, where they had emails going back and forth saying that these were just working papers. They shouldn't have been sent out, just like the Roe versus Wade thing that Clarence Thomas is saying shouldn't have been sent out. But they said they didn't refute the data; they just denied it categorically and tried to prosecute the people, different people they thought hacked into their system. None of that ever was successful, but the press put it away. And that's where we're at. Now, I don't, it's sort of like Pascal's equation, and that you say if there is a God, we better believe in him, because we'll have an eternity of going to hell. But if there is no God and you live a good life, you'll be all better. So there are a lot of people who say that we should do this. We should use Pascal's equation for global warming, and are so doing. Now, I understand that the Academy of Science has a demonstration project where you can put your hand on a piece of glass that in a chamber that has carbon dioxide that's illuminated by a particular kind of radiant bulb, and this one's hot, and the other one that has no carbon dioxide is cold. Now, the spectral lines of that bulb are tuned to the spectral response of carbon dioxide, and that's also dirty pool by some of the best scientists in the world, but I can represent them that they're trying to maximize their funding. Now, I don't know, there's a guy named Bjorn Lomborg who says there's a chance there is global warming, even though the last 20 years we've observed global cooling, and there's a lot of information that says we're headed into a new ice age, slowly easing. A volcanic interruption might put enough particles in the air that cause a winter. A nuclear explosion can cause a nuclear winter for a few years, but that's just a blip. We can't tell exactly what's going on. So there's a few more Armageddon answers that I can give you, but I am not convinced. Bjorn Lomborg says the money we're putting into global warming, which could cause a collapse of our society, could cure a whole list of our problems, and it would be money better spent. Now, he's also, some of what I said was stolen from papers by Bjorn Lomborg, which I can give you a bibliography of if we wanted to discuss it a little further. And I yield the balance of my time. Thank you.
Mike, you said something that surprised me, which was that temperatures are going down recently. And from what I can tell in this graph of the temperatures of the last 100 years, according to this source, they're actually going up steadily over the last 100 years. So can you cite a source that backs your claim that temperatures are going down right now and that we're headed for an ice age? Because when I
Bjorn Lomborg's thing says there's a bigger probability we're heading for an ice age. Now, I'll tell you that the average temperature is one thing, because much of the world is not as heavily instrumented as the United States. It's pretty clear that the temperatures that we have right now, as bad as the weather and unvariable as the weather is, were not as bad as the disruption during the Dust Bowl of the 1930s, which they claim caused in the Northern Hemisphere, which they claim caused famine and crop failures and the global depression, which was really the Northern Hemisphere, and which is vaguely responsible for World War II and economic collapse, which led to military collapse across the entire Northern Hemisphere.
So Mike, every other time in the history of the Earth that we were at this low of a temperature and it was going up, it kept going up. What is the data that Bjorn cites to say that we're about to go into another ice age, given that scenario?
Well, he's making use of Bernoulli equations, which I said transcendental equations can give many answers, just like the simple quadratic you learned in 5th grade. And you pick the one that'll maximize your funding. And if you want to substantiate the picture in Al Gore's book of the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor treading water so she can keep her torch from going out, you can find a solution to the Bernoulli equations that support that.
So none of us are here for funding, Mike. We're here to find the truth. And I'm still struggling with what the like, it sounds like you're claiming that temperatures are actually dropping rather than rising, even though this graph says that they're rising, and that we're headed for a new ice age, even though this graph over the, since the beginning of Earth's existence says that we're on a rise that is likely to continue at least for the foreseeable future. I'm trying to figure out like help me understand the perspective of like why this data is inaccurate and why temperatures are dropping when this sort of very public site is saying that they're increasing. Do you have like a site that says the temperatures are dropping over the last 20 years?
You can Google the East Anglia controversy and called ClimateGate scandal, and see how that was handled. You can buy Bjorn Lomborg's latest books or get some of his recent papers off of ResearchGate. I have some of this stuff. I can put together a bibliography and send it and attach it to the meetup site.
So this looks like it's on fact check. I'll take a look at it, and I'm going to let Phil talk, and I'll read the fact check stuff while I'm trying to listen as well.
Fact check is often I don't know which fact check, but Snopes fact check is a wholly owned subsidiary of some unreliable people.
This is factcheck.org. You're welcome to look up factcheck.org, but it's going to be a hard road if you're saying every fact-checking site is liberally biased, right? That's a little hard to imagine that no conservative would create a fact-check site. And actually, Snopes was founded by a conservative. So, that was my understanding. Maybe it's owned by a liberal now, but the original founder was a conservative.
That's true about Wikipedia also. The original founder was a Wikipedia, and he's come out saying not quite true. He doesn't have much influence over the content anymore.
Yeah,
but and I'm probably more liberal than conservative, but having been born in Plato's cave, what you see depends. I subscribe to what you see, but depends on your point of view. So I yield the balance of my time. If we continue this for another week, I'll have better numbers for you next time.
Great. And actually, I would invite you to join the online community, Mike. I'll post the link to the online community and some other information about the YouTube channel, etc., in the chat. And I'm going to let Phil go next. We would love to see your sources. Mike, when you get them in the online community so we can continue the conversation later.
Okay, I will say one more thing. Anybody who knows about transcendental equations knows there's many solutions to a transcendental equation, just like many solutions to two
Right.
solutions to a quadratic equation.
Mike, just
And
to,
you pick
to
the
stay
one you
focused,
wanna-
we're not talking about Bernoulli. We haven't mentioned the Bernoulli equations at all tonight. We only talked about the pace at which the temperature is rising on Earth and its comparison to historical norms. So that's really, we can talk about something else if you want, but you're the first one bringing Bernoulli equations up. None of the rest of the conversation was necessarily about that. So no one's
Okay.
using Bernoulli equations to defend climate change at all here. Like no one has done that tonight. And I don't think I'm not going to attempt to. I think the argument that the Earth's temperatures are rising at an unnatural rate is a more, because you're right, Mike, that, it's subject to interpretation, whereas the Earth's temperature and the rate at which it's rising is an objective metric, which is measurable throughout time with reasonable accuracy. With that said, Phil, let me let you talk.
Yeah, well, thank you for letting me talk. I must admit that I'm just not a deep enough thinker to understand what Mike just said. So I'll leave it at that. And what I got from it is that human beings are not as smart as we think we are. I mentioned that before. And the other part of the equation to that is that, it actually goes back to what I think Robert hinted at, I think, is that we have to be cautious about our arrogance of being more clever than we are. We do have to, as it seems, a kind of faith and a trust that technology, based on human consciousness, will lead us out of whatever this problem might be, whether it's caused by us or whatever. And I think that might actually be a misplaced faith in technology. And I think we might want to be a little bit more cautious and back up that faith with some caution that perhaps we might not be as smart as we think we are. And that's all I want to say, because the fact that human beings are not as smart as we are, at least some of us are not as smart as we think we are, is exactly the point that I started out with, that you can manipulate people into thinking about all sorts of things. And so we have to be careful to overemphasize what we are, and just accept that, and just be willing to accept the possibility we might be wrong, and be cautious about what might be laying ahead. And I think that's important. Don't put your faith merely on the fact that whatever might happen, we'll get out of it, because, look at how fantastic, the carbon nanotubes are. Like, we solved that. We will be able to solve that. We're just not desperate enough to solve it right now. But when it gets desperate, we'll be right there and problem solved. Don't believe that. I think that's a mistake to believe that. I'll just end at that, a word of caution.
Thanks, Phil. And I do want to encourage everyone to address like the topic that Robert started and I tried to continue. And I do still want to welcome anyone that has additional evidence for, that hasn't already been brought up, for thinking that this rapid increase in the last 200 years of global temperature is not human caused. But other than that, I'd love to talk about the game theory of, if we treat climate change as real, what are the downsides? And if we treat climate change as not real, right, one of the significant risks is the end of human existence, which has been brought up earlier tonight, which seems like a pretty big risk. And like Robert, I care a lot about human existence. I like people a lot, and I want us to continue to survive and thrive, and learn interstellar travel and learn to travel the universe. But that's another task for another day, which we can talk about. But that said, I want to encourage future comments to be more focused on, what are the pros and cons of treating climate change as if it's real. If people can focus on that for the next 20 minutes or so. since we're rounding out the last quarter of our evening. Aaron, let me let you go. And Mike, by the way, you still have your hand up if you don't mind putting it down, and then you're welcome to raise it again. Aaron Reyes.
Yeah. So Phil had a couple of really great points earlier, which I never really sort of prioritized as much as I probably should have. And then I've sort of dug into them a little further and then put the links in there, which is, the world's population has, transformed itself by 10x basically in the last 250 years. And our land use, obviously, has increased by, let's say, 4x-ish, something like that in the last 250 years. And then obviously we have transformed our use of energy, right? As we've leveraged technology and innovation and basically modernization. And we continue to do that, and more of the world gets that. So the reason I'm bringing all that up is that I think there's something that, and Becky had a fantastic points around the, basically causation and doing, let's say, proper scientific study. That if we're looking at a world with 8 billion humans that we don't see changing much, except maybe going to 10, and then until everyone becomes middle class enough, or just we in a new world of pair bonding where people just don't have a lot of kids, and we drop back down to 5 or 6 by maybe the end of the century. There's almost like geologic forces, like human versions of them, that are in play around population, land use, energy density of, becoming modernized. That I think a lot of the conversations around willingness to prioritize something to go after a degree target sort of just misses it, right? It's almost like people are saying, it's not quite as extreme as saying, well, we need to increase literacy, so we need to have lower or higher taxes, right? I mean, there's like a strange corollary there that doesn't seem to have a tight matching associated to these sort of input factors, right? Because the input factors are legitimate, which is population, land use, use of the ocean, basically the human ecology cycle and around energy and our modernization. And since we're not going to go back to human beings that are not literate, that live near caves or in open dwellings and go down to 10% of our population, it's like we're sort of stuck in a cycle that I don't, unless there's a transformation of a new type of technology that would reduce the amount of sort of energy density at source, I don't know how you change the input cycles over this century, being objective about it, or trying to be objective about it. And I mean, that's something Phil's sort of kicked me in the rear a little harder today on, and I kind of drilled further in. And I always was feeling this way, but this is sort of like another level to it, if that makes any sense. So I don't know if that just sort of throws off your whole conversation. Sorry if I did that, but
Okay. Let me let Robert go next.
Oh, yeah, in the chat I posted an article from The Guardian. I tried to find a reliable source on it, but yeah, it was saying that I think some cultures around the world are less likely to agree with climate change, I guess. And the US was, I think, 3rd on the list of 23 countries. So it's not, like I say, it's not a climate science explanation, but it might be a social science explanation about why people are more likely to believe certain data. So I don't know, I thought that seemed worthwhile because, yeah, if you're having this discussion, I don't know, in some country in Europe, it might be very different, right? I don't know, it seemed worthwhile. But yeah, I also was thinking about regardless, like I was saying before, regardless of whether or not you believe humans are causing it, is it worthwhile for humans to try to stop it from happening? And I think it's definitely worthwhile to try to stop it from happening. So like, what can we do to stop it from happening? I guess that's sort of, I feel like, where you wanted the discussion to.
Yeah, well,
maybe
I wanted
go.
you to explain why that was. And, you know, I wrote my list, which is like, one, staving off human extinction is a pro of treating climate change as if it's real, is we have at least a hope of preventing human extinction. And then as far as the cons, I thought about it and I was like, well, we could end up spending money on new technologies that focus on renewable energy rather than energy sources which are going to run out in the next 100 years. And that didn't seem like such a bad con to me. So I'm curious, like, if anyone has a really good con for like, why not treat climate change as if it's real? And Mike, I'm looking to you here if you're still.
Could I share my screen
Yeah,
for
yeah,
1 second?
go ahead.
I think there's like, well, there was a comic. I don't know, not able to share it, but there's a comic
I can
that
enable
was,
you. Give me 1 second. It's because we have.
it's okay. I
as
think
you
most
noticed.
people probably have seen this before, but there's a little comic that was very popular, like, I don't know, what year, 13 years ago or something. So it says, what if it's a big hoax and we create a better world for nothing? And then they list all these benefits, so like energy independence, like you mentioned, preserve rainforests, sustainability,
I have that one if you
livable
want it.
cities, clearing water and air.
Right.
Because yeah, I remember growing up and I remember pollution and smog being a really big issue around the world, right?
Yeah.
And like, I don't know, it feels like that comes from the same places that all the carbon dioxide comes from too. So like,
Right. It still is in some
maybe-
places. When I was in Shanghai, they would have warnings that you can't go outside because the smog was too bad. And so literally people weren't allowed to, like, were encouraged not to walk outside at all, just to stay at home because the pollution was so bad.
yeah, so like not doing anything is also costing us a lot.
Right.
Doing stuff's gonna cost money, not doing stuff's gonna cost money. So I'd rather live in a healthier environment than to just kind of settle in the one we have and suffer the consequences. So I mean, yeah, I realize it's sort of an argument outside of climate change, but it does seem like there's more positives than negatives. So yeah.
So Betsy, I want to let you go and then Darlene.
Yes, you know, I do agree with Phil that do we have, you know, and in science too, there's limitations, like you said, nothing is 100%, but to the best of our knowledge and data, what we have concluded is that climate change is real and it correlates and it's caused by human activity, or is exacerbated, if you want to be diplomatic about it, is exacerbated by human activity over the past 100 years. So I do think that, you know, human beings have this tendency of saying, oh, you know, they don't want things to change because either they're lazy or they have a profit motive. So there's a lot of companies that they don't want us to do anything about climate change. Why? Because that's going to affect their bottom line, like ExxonMobil and, you know, all the fossil fuel industry. And even, you know, the companies that the meat industry, for example, also produces a lot of, you know, methane and all that stuff that exacerbates climate change. But I do think that one of the things that they do is they shift the blame towards us. You know, they don't want to take any responsibility. They don't want their profits to decrease, and they don't want to change in any way because there's gonna affect their bottom line. So they shift the blame towards people, like, oh, you shouldn't have children, or you shouldn't drive, or you shouldn't do this. Like, of course, we should do, you know, what we can to minimize climate change, but they're the ones that are the polluters, and they're the ones that they need to change. there is a thing it's called the 80-20 rule. 80% of the outcomes in results are from 20% of the causes. So we really do need to focus on who is the greatest producers of all this, pollution and all this carbon that we're spewing in the atmosphere that is destroying the planet and is going to possibly cause our extinction. And it also, the Republicans or people that are conservative, they might not care about the environment. But if the Pentagon says that there's a risk to national security and global security because climate change is going to produce 1 billion climate refugees. And that is going to affect a lot of our security. We had in Europe 1 million Syrians coming into the European continent, and it disrupted a lot of their politics and a lot of things. So imagine if we had 1 billion climate change refugees, how is that going to be so disruptive to our lives? So even if you don't care about what happens to the environment, what's going to happen to our security? So I do think that we have to really get down to the culprits. And like you said, there really not that much downside to acting, even if it was not true, to diversify and stop the fossil fuels as our only source for energy. Or why can't we diversify our energy? Like you said, we should not put all our eggs in one basket. And the renewables are going to decrease not only the pollution, but it's going to create another source of jobs that are going to help people. So why not diversify, and why not act as if it's real? And it is.
Thanks, Betsy. And yeah, I think the oil reserves are supposed to last 50 more years, and so we're going to need an alternative at that point, because there's just going to be no gas left in the world, unless we find a synthetic way of creating gas, which there are attempts to do but hasn't been done yet, at a commercially viable way. But Darlene, let me let you speak.
I was raised in a family where my dad was working for a nuclear power plant, and so he was getting all this information, and this isn't like pro nuclear thing, but he was saying, look at this picture of the Earth on this year, and look at the picture of the Earth on this year, and look at the picture. And my dad was sitting there showing me all these pictures of our Earth on different years, and he said, look, during these years that it's warmer, the oceans are greener. And so my dad, I was just raised in a family where it's like kind of like the Earth, when there's more carbon emissions, then there's the plants balance it out, and the algae balances out, and the ocean will be greener. And so he was of the opinion, and I kind of believe it kind of still, that even if we are able to increase the temperature, the Earth has a way of balancing that out. My understanding is that the fear is that it would get warm enough to release the ethane or methane, and that once methane starts getting released more is when we would have a runaway climate increase. I'm shocked that so many people are always talking about carbon this, carbon that, because we have control over that. But if ethane or methane, I forget which one it is, it gets released, we're not going to have. Is that the one? That's the one we wouldn't have control over. So, but from what I can see, it, I'm in my 40s now. I was kind of told by my teachers at school that the Earth was going to be much hotter by now than it currently is, and it's really not hotter now. So it kind of seems to me like what my dad was telling me was correct. So I guess based upon that, I kind of don't believe that we are causing climate change, nor do I think we, in this particular way with carbon emissions, that we can. However, I hate breathing pollution. So what 2 people ago, what somebody said about having cleaner resources, and the reason shouldn't be, in my opinion, we should improve things not for climate change, but so that we have better air quality and help our lungs, and help if breathing bad air is causing people's brains to not develop normal, for these children that live in inner cities, I believe that would be a good enough reason. So,
And
thank you.
Darlene, would you also agree that given that the natural resources we have, like coal and natural gas and et cetera, are all going to run out in about the next 100 years, that looking for alternatives would be a wise idea to do?
Yeah, I'm pro nuclear, and I'm pro Tesla, and I'm pro finding new ways that we probably haven't even discovered yet.
Great.
I'm not against I'm not against the people who believe in climate change. I just don't believe we don't have that much control of it regarding carbon emissions. So
Got it. Out of
I'm kind of in
curiosity,
between.
given the comparison that we saw to like the last 200 years, the 1 degree Fahrenheit increase per 100 years, and that historically the fastest 1 degree had gone up that we could measure was 168,000 years. What leads you to feel like sort of skeptical that the last 200 years of temperature increases are human caused, when you see that kind of distinction? It's like a 1,600 times difference in rate of increase of temperature.
Well, I just don't feel like humans caused it. I feel like volcanoes and meteors
Those have
were
existed
bigger.
since Earth's history, right? So those were all around in the last 500 million years. In the last 500 million years, there's never been a temperature increase even 1,000 times near the temperature increase that we've experienced in the last 200 years. So I'm curious what leads you to feel like the temperature increase is not human caused, given that scenario?
I don't know enough to answer the question. I apologize, Garrett.
That's okay. I'm just
My
I'm just trying to
biggest
pick your
comment
brain,
is
like,
regarding algae.
yeah, no, I'm just saying, like, if the algae was going to naturally keep us in check the way that it had historically for the last 500 million years, right? Algae has existed a really long time. Then, right, the temperature wouldn't be going up at this unprecedented speed, right? It would, if it wasn't human caused and it was part of natural fluctuations, we would still, like, our temperature increases would be in line with historical temperature increases since Earth was created. And yet we're seeing that the temperature increase right now is 1,600 times faster than the very fastest that has ever been measured since Earth's beginning, other than the last 200 years. So that just feels very convincing to me, except with the, the
Probably what
surrounding
it
error
is
thing.
I haven't been studying it because I have this biased opinion that the algae is going to balance it out.
Right.
So I haven't been paying attention to any of it. So I
don't know. Can I jump in for one
apologize. I
second?
can't
Go
really
ahead.
answer. Thank you for telling me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about the algae, and I was thinking like the algae might like it, like this climate, and the algae might survive, but that might not translate into a climate that humans will like and humans will be able to survive in. So like you said, if we get to a point where we can't balance it out, there might be lots of algae, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the algae is going to save us. It just
Lots
means
of
that
algae,
the
no
algae,
grandkids. I want grandkids.
yeah, so that's all I was thinking is like, I wouldn't rely on that to save us, I guess.
Yeah, I want to jump in at this
Yeah,
point. Like,
it's your turn, Phil. So
yeah, I
go
mean,
ahead.
to answer Darlene, a couple questions. It's not an algae problem, and methane is the problem. But the problem is carbon is the trigger to the methane, So we have to control the trigger. Now, I don't know why they don't talk about the methane more, because that's a catastrophe point. But nonetheless, the carbon is the thing that will warm up enough to release the real danger, which is methane. And the other thing is really not algae, it's phytoplankton. Phytoplankton, we don't know exactly. I'm not enough of a scientist to know, but my niece is actually studying phytoplanktons. And they're the ones that are actually emitting the oxygen, but also a food source. They are the base food source for all the other creatures in the sea. And so if the temperature was in such a way, and I myself don't know, but it's warming and it's getting more acidy in the ocean, then in the sense that they die, heaven help us. The third thing I want to mention is was what Betsy said. It really brings back to my original point is like, when you discuss this, inevitably is going to involve politics in some point and business. And, I was actually a little surprised, but not totally, that somebody here mentioned that the United States were one of the 23 countries that was resistant to climate change. And that's really bad because, like, we are one of the wealthiest. Well, we're certainly the wealthiest nation, but one of the wealthiest, and even in terms of per capita. And we do not want enough to change and sacrifice our life in a certain way, our wealth and our convenience to change. Now, if I was living in, let's say, Bangladesh, or Somalia, and then people are asking me, or Brazil, asking me to, let's say, we got to be careful about this climate change because it's going to go extinct. And yet I see the hypocrisy that you, who could make the sacrifice, do not, while we were just simply trying to become somewhat closer to the lifestyle you have that you exported. I would feel like somehow that I'm being subjugated in some form. So please, at least show the fact that you are willing to sacrifice. When you ask us that we barely can make a living to survive, and yet we have to be careful about this, we're not anywhere close. Asking us to not chop down the rainforest because it will, ruin the carbon cycle. No, I have to survive, provide for my family. I'm not driving in some Mercedes or whatever, Lamborghini. I'm just trying to eat. And so therefore, it necessarily comes down to politics in some dimension, no matter how good the science is. And to actually bring it in that these people who are particularly, even in our country, who are what I call people who do not have enough ethics to believe in others, in some sense, do not make the sacrifice because they just want to make the profit line. In some sense, is like, where is the justice in all of this? That's why I mean, at the very beginning, it comes down to politics to a certain degree, because no matter how much truth there is, you also have to eliminate, at least to some degree, the hypocrisy that's behind it.
Thanks, Phil. I want to let Ryan go, and then we're going to kind of close out after that.
Okay, sorry to come off mute there. All right, so I think it was mentioned that carbon dioxide is a trigger gas. It is a trigger mechanism for warming to a point at which a much more volatile, much more powerful greenhouse gas, CH4, methane, will take place, will bleed out of permafrost and will bleed out of methane hydrate deposits on the ocean floor. Methane hydrate is a buildup on the ocean floor of what they call marine snow. Basically, when a fish dies or defecates or otherwise deposits organic material rich in carbon and hydrogen, and that deposits on the ocean floor over time. If you look at my two hands here and envision that as, you know, plates subduction, this is an oceanic plate, this is a continental plate. It's subducting, pulling that methane hydrate down under. Now, that process occurs at such a slow rate that you will, in fact, run out of the fossil fuels that we know. We're already running out of coal. That's a fact. You will run out of oil and natural gas, in it's estimated by the American Petroleum Institute in 50 to 60 years. That's not some wild, you know, drum beating, tree hugging environmental organization, the American Petroleum Institute. They're saying, hey, look, we're looking at peak oil by the mid 2020s. We've hit it now. As population continues to grow, our industrial use of petroleum will continue to grow, and we will far exceed our capacity. And yeah, within 50 to 60 years, we're looking at, you know, hey, 2080 or sooner. And then what do you have? You have people in the industrialized, in the industrializing world that, are we going to ship the gas that we make to them if we need to use it? I'm willing to bet that the American people will say, we're gonna take care of our own needs first before we take care of anybody in the developing world. You got to think about that. And so absolutely balancing our power, our power mix is critical. We have to do that. You know, that's solar, that's wind, that is in part, you know, nuclear, that's tidal. We have this great big rock that, you know, revolves around the earth twice every 28 days. You know, it pulls a massive volume of water twice a day in the tides, 2 high tides, 2 low tides, and you can generate an enormous amount of power with that. If you simply strung generators across, and it would look a lot like the lane dividers in an Olympic pool, you know, if you strung that across the mouth of the Bay of Fundy, you could power the entire North American continent on just 2 tides every day. That's astounding, the electricity that you can generate, the power that you can generate from that. I'll yield. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. And I'm just going to kind of summarize. It sounds like we came to the conclusion that the rate of temperature increase measurable in the last 200 years is so much faster than anything measurable that there is a significant chance that it could be human induced. But it is possible that due to the inaccuracy of measurements historically, there might have been small periods of time where it rose this fast, but then drops commensurately afterwards, so that it seemed like the rise was slower. But even if that were the case, I didn't hear any good reasons yet not to invest in renewable energy, considering the fact that fossil fuels are going to run out at the longest. As coal is 114 years, natural gas is 53 years, and oil is 51 years that we have of reserves left. And even nuclear, which Darlene mentioned, you know, is still a non-renewable source, and it will run out eventually. Whereas, you know, the sun's not going to go away anytime soon. It's actually going to envelope the Earth before it goes away. So we're gonna have to figure out interstellar travel before that happens. So it's as renewable comes. Solar power and wind is probably similar. Geothermal is probably similar. So all of those sources are as renewable as Earth is renewable. And so let's try to figure out how we can survive on Earth until Earth doesn't survive anymore. And by that time, hopefully we figured out how to get somewhere else in a safe way. So That said, I would love anyone to share things that they learned in the chat. If they learned anything tonight, I would love everybody to share anything that you learned tonight, or just a positive experience that you had tonight. I really enjoyed hearing everybody, everyone's perspectives. We did have a diversity of perspectives, which I appreciate. And I learned new things about climate change and about I hadn't thought about the game theory perspective that Robert kind of introduced, even though I've always kind of, like I said in the beginning, I've operated assuming that climate change was true, even though I didn't have a really firm reason to believe it, although now I think I have a better reason to believe it than I did originally. The game theory kind of makes me feel like it's just better off. It's like free will, right? It's better off to act like it's true rather than we had to talk about free will a couple of weeks ago. And pretty much even the majority of people don't believe free will exists, but they all agree that it's better to act like it exists. And that's not exactly true. They say that determinism is true, and so we don't make non-deterministic decisions, but it's better to act as if we do, even though they believe that we don't. And so similarly, whether you believe that climate change is human induced or not, it sounds like the winning strategy is to treat it as if it is, and to look for renewable energy sources. At least that was generally what I heard, although I welcome everybody to join the online community and continue the conversation. Mike said he was going to get some sources for us that might make us question those beliefs. Although that's where my head's at now. I look forward to seeing what Mike does in the online community so that we can learn anything new that is to be learned about this subject. So with that said, I just want to thank you all for participating, for joining. Would hope to see you guys next week. And Darlene, breathing better air is also a good reason. Asphyxiation or lack of oxygen causes people to think very poorly, causes all kinds of problems. So we'd love to encourage everyone to come next week. We're gonna talk about self-worth and how to measure self-worth. I think that most people are doing it wrong, and I'm gonna try to make an argument that there's a better way to do it, one that can help you feel good about yourself for doing the right thing, and not help us fall into the self-worth pit that a lot of people feel about being jealous of others and looking at things in a glass half full sort of way. We're going to look at it in a glass half empty sort of way. We're going to look at it in a glass half full sort of way. And I think it's a loyal to truth way of measuring self-worth that's more accurate. So I hope that some of you can make it next week. And I hope you all have a great week. And I hope to see many of you in the online community using Discord. So thanks a lot, everybody.